Show me your heart. I know that it's beating. Tell me that you love me too. So I know your heart is true. 'Cause I need some proof of love. 'Cause I need some proof of love. 'Cause I need some proof of love. Hi everybody, welcome to Proof of Love. Today's episode is going to be depressing, so I'm sorry to tell you that, but I hope that there will also be some uplifting aspects of it. I recently had a friend of mine experience a very tragic loss, and I don't want to get into that loss, but it was a violent death of people in his family. And, you know, it really left me thinking a lot about how a person is supposed to get through something like that, you know, how you can believe in God, why do these things happen to people? And it's just been very, very weighing on me, right? And, you know, we all complain about lots of different things, but this to me is something that's a little bit more insurmountable than the usual things that we go through, even in the time of Corona. So I decided to put up a post on my Facebook wall because I was thinking about, you know, what is the appropriate punishment for murder? What is the way to deal with that? And part of me has always thought very compassionately for not only the victim, but for the bad person or whatever. But I don't know. It's a really complicated subject. So my friend Chuck, who's actually been on Proof of Love before and talked about some other stuff, he told me a little bit about something that he had experienced, and he was kind enough to actually share this with us. Hopefully none of you will ever have to face this type of a loss, but you know, even as a friend of somebody who goes through something like that, it's really like you want to help them, you don't want to offend them, you don't want to upset them, but you can't really do anything. So that's the framing for today's show. We're going to talk about it. Thank you very much, Chuck, for joining us today.
Yeah, glad to be here and hopefully help anybody I can with you know, what I consider to be an overcomer story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you gave me a pretty good chunk of it the other day, and we're obviously going to go into it. But yeah, it's definitely quite a journey. So if you want to give people a little bit of background, a little bit about you, before we go into that stuff, this is a crypto show, right? So you are now over at Flote. We've had Aaron and Kingsley on Proof of Love before, dear friends of mine. I just saw you at the Flote Festival, so congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I did kick off with the Flote team just this past January, and you know we're kind of wrapping up our first quarter together and. Got a lot of exciting things coming, and for those who don't know, I'm a 22-year, 25-year, somewhere in there, software developer with a focus in front-end development. I've been patented a couple times, worked on a lot of different projects, everything from CIA and FBI projects to FedEx and Shutterfly and Quest, and you know a lot of different clients for a lot of years. With Flote, you know, I'm working in the role of CXO, which is Chief Experience Officer, and I'm trying to own all things UX, DX, and EX, where most people know what user experience UX is. DX is the developer experience, same kind of stuff except for developers, and the EX is the same kind of stuff except for employees. So I'm trying to care for all of those people and be empathic about the situations. And one of the reasons I advocate for empathy as a developer is because of our topic today, you know, death and murder and loss of those kinds. So that's kind of where I'm at.
All right. Well, thank you for the introduction. Now on to the into the more challenging stuff. So give me a little bit of background.
Yeah. So when you posted your thing, I believe what I shared was, you know, my just right off the bat, you know, my mother was murdered. It happened when I was very young, so it's different than a lot of people's situations. But I was not aware of it thoroughly. It was kind of revealed to me as I grew up. I had my first kind of an encounter with understanding that I was that my mother had died when I was 9, and I found an obituary, a laminated piece of paper, and I read it, and I saw that it was survived by her son, Charlie or Charles Williams, and that was me, and I was like, wait a minute, I was 9 years old, I didn't know about the birds and the bees, and I thought at this point that I would at some point get a mom. It just took my dad marrying somebody or choosing.
And you
But
were with your dad the whole time?
so at that time I was living with my father, but my childhood consisted of the early years being with my grandmother, my kind of going back and forth between my paternal and maternal grandmother, and then my father taking me to Minnesota, and then me living with an aunt for a period of time, coming back to live with my dad, then living with another aunt for a period of time, and then coming back to live with my dad and his my stepmom, and then moving out. And I moved out when I was 17 years old, and I've been kind of on my own ever since. So a lot of different things kind of going on there.
Okay. So at 9 years old, you kind of figure out that there's something amiss. What happens from that point? Did you ask anyone? I mean, did you think of asking before? What did everybody say happened to your mom? They were just,
Well, that's the thing. I didn't. Nobody had really ever told me anything about anything ever happening to my mom. I didn't have much contact with family growing up. Kind of estranged from family, and I think a lot of that was my dad's bad case of wanderlust and just kind of disconnection from a lot of the family. But that day, I did confront him. I asked him. I said, "What happened to my mom?" And he gave me a look that I had never seen before that basically communicated to me that I should never talk about this again. And he told me that she was shot in a burglary. And basically I kind of accepted that and was very sad for a period of time, and, kind of realizing that I would never get a mom, and kind of looking at the world in a whole different way, looking at my friends and how that my friends treated their mothers and things like that. And I kind of grew up, went through my adolescent years just kind of believing that my mom was shot in a burglary and all this and that. And then when I was 17, I got a letter from an uncle that I didn't know I had. But it was my mother's sister's husband, I believe, who sent me a letter saying that if I wanted to see my grandmother, this would probably be my last opportunity, because she was ill, she was suffering with cancer, and at the time I was 17 and had just graduated high school, and had just purchased a car, had a new girlfriend, and I was like, hey, I got this letter, and she encouraged me to do something with it, so we made a road trip down to Texas, and when I got there, I noticed like there was all kinds of memories flooding back, and I knocked on the door, and a woman who, for a split second, I thought was my mom because she looked a lot like her. I only had a couple pictures of her. Opened the door, and I realized this is my aunt, and I didn't know that I had an aunt either up until this point. So that was kind of a happy reunion for a moment. And we got to talking and sat down and kind of connected. And at some point, my grandmother asked me, "What did your father tell you about your mother?" And I said, "Yeah, the whole burglary story." And my grandmother and my aunt, they kind of exchanged glances, and she was just like sullen and said, "No, that's not what happened." And she explained to me that a couple weeks prior to my mother's passing, she had witnessed an argument between my father and my mother where my mother was threatening to take me away from him, and she apparently witnessed him saying, "If you do, I'll kill you," and if, and then she turned up 2 weeks later dead, stabbed 27 times. And she said that she had a bunch of articles that I could read if I wanted to. And I was like, no, that's not necessary, because I had witnessed enough to kind of, piece things together.
you wouldn't want to know. I mean, I think I wouldn't want to know at first, but
I didn't have to. No newspaper. The newspapers didn't need to convince me. I had witnessed my father's temper, and I had kind of grown up very confused as to why he could be so temperamental and angry and physically violent with women, and never lift a finger to spank me, which was it was just utterly confusing. But in that moment, it kind of came together. I had a whole bunch of flashbacks of this and that, and there was one. I probably shouldn't go into too much detail because I don't know. He's not in jail, and there are a lot of people in the world who believe that he should be punished if he is indeed the person who did this. They never found the murder weapon. My father's black, and my mother was a German immigrant, so, and this happened in the state where perhaps those kinds of people aren't treated the same as other people who might be better connected and have money and family or whatever. So I believe it was just kind of let go at the time, and the the system, such as it was, failed. So to those people, I say, look, he's not a part of my life. For me, it was enough to just kind of know that after that incident, I confronted him again about it, and I got enough information to kind of know that, I mean, he wasn't denying his involvement. Essentially, I'll put it that way. And so there was that time. My daughter. No, it was so that was when I was 17 or 18 that I confronted him, and I basically kind of began my own life from that point forward, just saying, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, live my own life. And then I had a family young because I wanted my own family. I got married when I was 20, had my first daughter when I was 23. And he visited my first daughter when she was about 12, 18 months old. And that's the last time I've talked to or had any kind of interaction with my dad.
Wow.
And, I look back
Why?
on, say again?
Isn't that like kind of a weird time to not have any more contact? Like that just seems like weird timing, right? And then it went that long. I don't think it's weird that you wouldn't want anything to do with him, but
Yeah.
it just seems strange that it was such a delayed thing. It's like, wouldn't he want to be in your daughter's life? What do you think made that the demarcation point, or were you just kind of sickened by, like, do you still love him?
Well, I'll put it this way. I've definitely forgiven him, but only for my sake, because I don't want to carry that anger and pain.
Mhm.
On some level, because I fundamentally care very deeply about all of humanity, you know, I love him as much as I would love somebody that is not close to me, who's not in my inner circle. And I try to demonstrate that love by, building and contributing to the world where people can benefit from the value that I bring. So I guess that's kind of as far as it goes. It's an arm's length kind of thing. There's not, there's some every now and again I'll have some appreciation of some of the things that he did and maybe some of the sacrifices that he made, but it wasn't. His life was never necessarily about me or his kids. So there's that whole side of things. But then looking back at the experience of growing up without a mother, I certainly came to appreciate mothers in general, right? And women generally also. So I have a very deep appreciation of what women go through, how women deal with this world, how scary it can be to be a woman and live in this society, and kind of always be looking over your shoulder and always being concerned about whether the man you're with is the man that you're with, those kinds of things. Like there's a lot of things that I've probably thought about that a lot of men don't think about. Having the absence of a mom is just kind of filling that void. So that there was some gain, and I think the pains that I kind of had as a childhood and growing up made me such a kind of a person. And I'll put it this way: I was pro death when I was an adolescent. Like I remember writing essays in high school about how I was
Because
very.
of your mom passing away, or
Yeah,
just okay? So
yeah,
you
yeah.
liked capital punishment at
I was
first. Got
for capital punishment
it.
basically up until that. that incident, and then I had to reprocess everything from the time, I would say, from the time I was 17 to 23.
But why? What made you reprocess?
Well, so imagine that you're for capital punishment, and you think all murderers should be put to the chair, no matter what. It doesn't matter, whether they're a rapist or what like the
An abuse
circumstances don't matter.
victim, yeah, it
Yeah,
could be like, the gamut.
yeah, exactly. Like just imagine that you're in that scenario and you believe that and something happened close to you, family member, friend, brother, sister, whatever, child, that they were killed, they were murdered, and you probably inherently, that whoever did that should be killed, and then you realize, or you learn, that it was somebody that you loved that did the crime, right? It was somebody that you really deeply cared for, or somebody who is currently in your life that you have always loved and you've never had a bad experience with, who did this heinous thing. It really forces a mind to look at the energies that exist between this intense hatred and desire for punishment and this love that you might have for this person, whatever it may be, even if it's just a mild appreciation. If there's no animosity there, it makes it very hard when the perpetrator is a human to dehumanize them.
Mhm.
And so I had to grow through that in order to really look at the situation and kind of reconsider the whole thing. And that's what I'm really talking about. I had to reconsider. I had to rethink everything that I thought, everything that I'd been told, everything, from how humane capital punishment is to the deepest, darkest parts of myself. And I came to the realization that inside of all of us is a murderer, and, looking at my own history, I am Germanic, Afro, Cherokee, Irish American. You look at that history, look at the history of, being a German, there's history, there's murder history there. Cherokee, 90 some percent of the Native American population was wiped out within 100 years of people settling here on this North American continent. At least that's what they tell you in the history books. Irish have been enslaved in a lot of different ways for a long period of time. And America itself has a history of slavery and death and murder and war
There's
throughout its
ongoing
entire history.
slavery right now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you look at this and you look at this kind of this human history that we have, and us as individuals, and we always want to believe that the murderer is external, at arm's length. Like, I would never be that person. But the fact is, when you grow up understanding that death is near, death is always present, death is a part of life, and we are one decision away from murder. That's a very real thing that a lot of people just aren't willing to accept. They just
Do
won't.
you think that's true? Because, I mean, most of us don't go around murdering. I do think that people have the capacity, but I don't think we're like one step away, right? Um,
No, yeah. No, I'm not saying
like one red light,
yeah.
like gone wrong, and then it's over.
Well, yeah, no, I'm not like suggesting that we're all like that character in Falling Down who's just like, one job loss away from shooting up a store. It's just that, you know, I truly believe that any human could be conditioned to murder. And
Yeah, I think so.
I think that the military system does that very well. And I know that my father had a history, and I had to kind of look at that. As far as I know, he wasn't necessarily abused, but I do know that he was drafted into Vietnam, and I do know that he had to do some things in Vietnam for a short period of time, and I do know that they didn't have PTSD treatment back then. In the 70s, when they released a group of people, they said when the Vietnam War was declared to be ended, anybody who had been in service for, I believe it was less than 19 months, could exit without any penalty. And he was one of those people he was like at that mark, and so he exited, and What I know from talking from my family is that he ran away when he was 13. He lived on his own since then. He was a state championship boxer prior to that. So he had a pugilistic mentality. Everybody in the family that I've talked to says he was the one with the worst temper. I've seen it. I've seen him beat women. And so on one level, like there's definitely some kind of brokenness and lack of control in that person where you're willing to strike somebody that you claim to love or somebody that you claim to be with, to think that that's okay, and on some levels that's dehumanizing the other. But I don't know how much of that was the conditioning that the state put in, for as part of military training. I don't know how much of that was anger and frustration from being a black man in a southern part of the nation where everybody's racist against you and limiting your opportunities and preventing you from excelling in areas that you would like to. There's any number of excuses and reasons that anybody could be given for doing ultimately anything, including murder. And I got tired of that game. I got and processing and understanding all of that through getting to a psychological place where I can say, yes, okay, I don't want to carry this anymore. I had to land in the place where I said, for my own sake, I have to forgive him. For my own sake, I can't carry this burden. I can't carry this anger, because living in the mindset of punishment doesn't help or hurt really anybody. And so I had to kind of flip it into this kind of loving position. And honestly, I went very deep with this. During that time between 17 and 23, I became a youth pastor. I was a biblical scholar for a period of time. I sat with pastors. I taught children about the Bible, teenagers, and there are any number of different pathways I could have gone, but I chose what I consider to be a path of truth and love. And he may or may not know that I have forgiven him, but if I ever talk about it, I kind of put that out there. And there was somebody on Facebook that apparently is in a relationship with him that I'm not friends with, but I
Like a
meet all my
girl, like
kids.
a girlfriend.
Yeah, uh-huh. Yep. And she had at one point tried to reach out to me and say, "Hey, you should connect with your father," and all this and that. And I don't know how much of the story she would know, right?
Yeah, pretty sure she doesn't know why you're not talking.
Right. Yeah. I doubt that she knew.
No, she's probably just trying to be nice.
Yeah. And I thought that was, interesting to say the least. But again, it wasn't something that I wanted to be interested, because I've gotten to a place where, I feel like this life and all the time that I allocate with my mind to whatever, it's limited. It's extremely limited. So I have to have a very strong filter on what's going to come into my life and where I'm going to put my energy. And it comes all the way down to a frustration on top of whatever's going on. If I'm in an argument with Melina, there's a frustration on top of it, just for the simple fact that we are arguing. Like, I don't want to be spending my time doing this. This is not something I want to do. So I'm inclined to do, I think, maybe I don't know if it's common or uncommon, but I do things that help me let go of things more quickly as a habit. And
Such as?
such as a gratitude. I try to. I think as a habit, I very frequently appreciate things. I appreciate whatever the thing that is pissing me off. I try to find something to appreciate about it. And this is a practice that I've kind of just naturally developed over time, to help me reduce anger inside of me. I have lived most of my life not having any murderous impulses at all. there are
Right.
there are
Wait, are you seeing my little chats here? Because those are my internal questions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's totally fine. I was just like, I'm like, this guy's good. He knows
Yeah.
exactly what I'm going to ask him. But then you said murderous impulse. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
that was a strong phrase. Like,
Yeah.
do you feel like a deep anger towards your father? Like, do you ever want to kill him? Because, I mean, he took away something so sacred from you.
In the
I, I'm,
beginning,
I'm curious about that. I'm like, how do you actually forgive somebody, right? Because people say you forgive them, but especially if it's something fresh,
yeah.
like, is that a
Oh,
daily practice that you have to do? Like, do you forgive them and then the next day you're like, you know what, I take it back, screw you, dad, and then like you go back and you're like, fine, I forgive you today,
well,
like, how is that?
I think that really depends on the person. I'm a methodical thinker. I think some other people could be more wishy-washy if they're emotionally driven. I don't think that I'm necessarily an emotionally driven person, though I can be overwhelmed by my emotions. So when I made the decision to forgive, it wasn't really okay, I forgive him. It was okay, well, how do I do this? It was how can I how do I know when I have forgiven him? And it I there was a few instrumental pieces early on that I worked through, and I still, speaking of emotions, I should mention that currently my wife Melina, she practices this thing called the emotion code, and it is a healing modality that releases trapped emotions. And
What does modality mean? I hear people throw that phrase, hearing modality. What is that?
oh yeah, yeah. So so I would say type. Like there's a number of different types of healing methods. That's what I would how I would define a modality. So it's like a
Okay,
version of
cool.
healing. So it's an energy healing kind of thing that
Hmm.
releases trapped emotions that store themselves in the body, the ethereal body or the physical body or both. And we started working on some of those emotions actually very recently, within the past month. And I don't know if it was one of those sessions, but I have found that to be extremely effective. I've with one of the first sessions that she did, my heartbeat actually changed permanently. My heart used to beat very intensely, and now it's much more subdued. It's much more, the resting heartbeat is I'm sure it's like if I had blood pressure measurements of before and after, I'm sure that my blood pressure would have just been down instantly within a day after one of those first sessions. So anyway, but to answer the question of how do you forgive, I'm just speaking for myself specifically. What I did is between that time of 17 and let's say 23, I broke down the myself and my identity. I basically I think what I
What does
did
that
was
mean?
I reconstructed my identity. I had to ask myself, who am I? Am I my father's son? Is that my identity? Am I this Germanic, Afro Cherokee, Irish American? Is that my identity? Am I a black man, as other people want to label me at the time? Am I mulatto, as I technically am under some definite? Like I kept asking myself, and it was just I just kept asking myself, who am I? What am I? Why? Who? What? Am I a murderer? Could I be a murderer? What do I want to be? And it took me a while to even get to a place of not just who am I and what am I, but who do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be? And so there was like some kind of a gradient, some kind of travel, some kind of mental traversing of re-establishing a self, a new self. And once I got to a place where I started kind of building my identity and saying, okay, I'm choosing to be a father, and I'm choosing to be a an honest businessman. I'm choosing to be a person who is good with money. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing that. And when I started making those choices, at some point, inevitably, I think one of the tools that I came across was this thing that at the time was called Christ Life Solution, but I don't think it's called that anymore. It's like some kind of other thing, but it's essentially like you revisit stages of your emotional development, and you write letters to that infant, that child, that toddler, that adolescent, that
Hmm.
teenager.
Oh, right, right, right. Kind of like self-care of the inner child or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So you get in touch with that and you kind of revisit that stuff. And I had some weird, like really intense flashbacks. And I think I recovered a first memory of my mother holding me as a baby, pressing her forehead to mine, and it kind of I don't mean to digress, but that memory triggered something in me. Like I knew I always had some weird thing. If somebody like pressed their forehead to mine, I just felt cared for. I felt loved. I felt connected with anybody who would do that, who just kind of, push their forehead to mine. And it was in that moment that I understood, oh, this must be why. This must be why that I feel that connection, because my mother did that when she would hold me as a baby. Anyway, so those tools kind of helped me to kind of reconnect and rebuild my identity. And then I got to the place where I was like, okay, well, am I a forgiving person? Am I the kind of person who would forgive? Because if I am or not, then there's one big thing that I should probably be forgiving, as or at least as a target, And I started working on what that meant. And you know what? I'm just going to look it up, because this is one of the first things I did, is look up the definition of forgive. If you don't mind me just.
No, that's fine.
Okay, so it's currently defined by Google as a verb. It's an action. Stop feeling angry or resentful towards someone for an offense, flaw, or mistake. So there, and there's also the canceling of a debt in the financial, but the definition here is the ending of a feeling of anger or resentment, which I thought was key when I looked it up. I'm like, okay, yes, there's definitely anger and resentment toward my father for, if this is true, which I just assumed that it is true, that. And then I was like, okay, well, how can I let go of this anger? Well, I didn't even get to that place. Before that, I had to learn that the only way out of a feeling was to feel it through, was to really process it, and working through it. And that was all new for me, because up until that time, I grew up essentially without emotion, because, well, I won't go into a lot of reasons, but let's just say that as a child and living in the various environments that I did, I built a shell around my emotions. Up until, let's say, my 20s, believed that emotions were a complete and utter waste of time. And I think this kind of contributed to my pro-capital punishment stance, was I didn't care about other things. And other people, and or my own emotions. And it's so weird, because I look back and I realize, like, I didn't even know what my favorite stuff was. People would ask me, what's your favorite? I couldn't get passionate about football games. I didn't even pretend to give a shit about any of that stuff. I was often so disconnected from everything, and I just couldn't understand how people got passionate about things. How could you have these emotions? How could you, like, about a touchdown? Really, a touchdown? The guy went across a line, and you're gonna jump up and cheer, or you're gonna throw popcorn at the TV? Like, I don't get that. Like, that's just,
Right.
and so it just seemed to me like that so many people around me were so emotionally driven. I'm like, how do you live your life? How do you make plans? How do you get anything done with all these emotions pulling you around everywhere?
Mm-hmm.
And my bias, that bias was even supported biblically, because Jesus talks about how all emotions should be subservient to one's reason. You should be able to think through things, and your emotions only support your decision making. They don't make your decisions for you. And so if I don't know if I built up this kind of emotional bias, or this racism of sorts, against people who were emotionally driven, and I
Okay.
just wouldn't associate with them. Well, again, during that same time frame, it flipped. I was working in a career where with development, and I saw that developers were cold generally. That's why I think I identified with them early on. Hey, these are my people. You guys
Right.
don't know how to connect. That's awesome.
Right. Okay.
um, and so again, I had to migrate through and reconnect my emotions. Now, this wasn't really finalized until I told you in the last time, where my wife and I went and did ayahuasca together during our honeymoon. So I went
Mm-hmm.
through a whole marriage still kind of in this mindset, but at least in my early 20s, I started to acknowledge that somehow emotions were valuable, and and letting go of the bad things should help me. I got to that belief during that place. So I started looking. I looked at the Bible and I looked at Christianity at that time as essentially a pathway. I looked at Jesus as a model for how to forgive, because people wanted to murder him, and
How can you believe in Jesus if your own like life has been so marred with such great sadness? What kind of God would allow for such a horror?
yeah,
Right? I mean,
yeah.
won't most people be atheists after this? Like, I think my friend probably is. And I don't know where to tell him God is. I mean, people always say that. And yeah, there's some silver lining at some point or another. Something good might happen from it, but it's
Hmm.
pretty brutal.
Yeah, it's a really hard thing to do, and that's why, like, for me, the act of reading the Bible, continuing to hold up this faith while working through this emotional turmoil, and trying to teach teenagers about the virtues of Christianity, and living a Christian life, and learning from characters in the Bible. It forced me to, like, constantly make that choice over and over again. Like, I was questioning everything the whole entire way. I was always skeptical. Every single verse that I read, and I would go to pastors and say, "Okay, tell me about this. I think God doesn't mind gambling, because you were talking about gambling in the sermon the other day, and I don't think God minds. Let's have a debate about this." And I would go to them and, and talk this stuff through. And so, in a way, it hardened my faith, because I had to open up my perspective of God beyond how it's depicted in the Bible. I had to, and look outside of this kind of bearded guy in the sky to what is this fundamental thing that that connects us humans to this greater thing, and what is that greater thing?
Mhm.
And I'm still on that journey, and I have some current conclusions that I continue to test on a regular basis. But at the time, I did get to a place where God was bigger than what was in the Bible. Basically, I grew beyond what was in the Bible, and I had to conclude that whatever had happened, like, you look at nature. I don't know if you call them murders, but death happens a lot. Death is a part of any natural cycle. And one of the frustrating things about our society is I began to look at society from this kind of veil-opened mindset. Is in our society, death is extremely sanitized, at least here in America. And there are many other societies, and there are subcultures, and there's exceptions that prove the rule. But the rule is, you don't talk about death. We don't deal with death. Death is not in your face. Death is not something that's present in our daily lives. It's not something that we're always thinking about, unless a funeral happens, unless it actually happens and smacks you in the face, or you're expecting it to happen, and you are forced to think about it because of a family member or a self-terminal situation. So, how do you get through that? How do you get past that? Well, you you have to understand that there is something. You have to, well, maybe not even understand. You first have to believe. You have to believe that there is something. And if you can't get to that place where there is something, and you want to go down the atheist path, I don't know where to, I can't help you. So
Yeah, but I feel like believing in God is such a, I mean, excuse the expression, but an act of faith. And there's no real, like, particularly compelling reasons. So, as a person that wasn't really brought up religious, like, I think Jesus is cool, whatevs. But, like, I just don't think that there's something that can make me think, oh, there's definitely God. I'm going to suspend reality and I'm going to believe in this 100%. And it just seems like people who grew up with that, like, indoctrinated to them, they have that advantage. But I'm not that sure that if I were God, I would want everybody just indoctrinated into believing in me. Wouldn't they have to come to that on their own because
yeah.
they like, but I don't want to come to that because it doesn't seem logical. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that there is no God, but I think it's definitely a big struggle if you're not growing up with that indoctrination, for lack
I
of a better.
Yeah, to a large degree, I agree. Um, but what you're kind of touching on and pointing at here is this whole idea of free will, and it's completely germane to our subject because it is free will that causes us to choose to believe in things. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a choice. You continue if you believe in a thing. That's not a lot of people attach it to their identity, right? They just say, I'm a Christian. That's just who I am. It's who I've been. It's my family been that way. Like that's a thing. And people have a really hard time, I've noticed, separating their identity from their beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're usually extremely connected in that if I'm a black person, I believe that I have a black history, that I'm supposed to talk this way or walk this way or achieve these things, or these are the windows of opportunity, or even to use that framework to turn it upside down. Because these barriers exist, because of this, I'm going to break through. I'm going to, so it becomes this whole anti energy. And that's, to me, there's a lot of friction involved whenever you're working against or within a conditioned state.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I think it was Krishnamurti who said, enlightenment is the removal of conditioning. Like when you understand that you have been conditioned about a thing, the
Mm-hmm.
enlightenment is when you can say, oh, I don't have to believe that anymore. I'm not that person anymore. I can choose to be somebody else. I can believe something else. And then you can walk away from it. And what you walk into is oftentimes something greater. That doesn't mean the old part of you, that old belief system, just dies, because you can easily just slip back into that and think that way. And you might do that habitually if you've done it for a long time. But when you start to choose a different way of looking at things and a different belief system, then new opportunities of ways of thinking come through. And you can make internal choices that will align with, these new beliefs, and may not disagree with your old beliefs even, and can surprise you.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of adds new dimension to what you thought you believed, and now you can even articulate it better because you've expanded your beliefs beyond, or were willing to let them go, and they came back as true principles in some ways. So, and that, I feel like that kind of flowering happens when anybody's identity is destroyed. And I think that's the scary thing that's going on, like right now with this COVID stuff. People's identities are wrapped up in safety and security and health, and the rule of law that government provides, and all of these kinds of boundaries and conditions of safety that the let's say the farmed population of humanity is dependent upon for their identity. There's so many people, if the government didn't exist and television didn't exist, they wouldn't have much of a life left over. They go to work at their government job, they come home and they watch TV, they eat the snacks that the process system provides, and that's it. They just do that cycle until they die. And that's not me. And I feel like that this whole situation has caused a lot of people to kind of look at that system and say, is that me? Because I didn't make that me. I didn't have an option in that. That social contract wasn't part of me. Where do I opt out? And that system doesn't allow people to opt out. You kind of have to do it almost violently. But in this system, it's just saying no, thank you, and that's, I think, the empowering thing. So you have to say no, thank you to these old beliefs, these old identity pieces, and then you can get to a place where you say, okay, now here I am. Can I forgive? Can I let go of this anger and resentment? Because now that I understand the psychology, the history, the situation, can I look at it from that bigger picture and still see God in what's going on? Because there's so many billions and trillions of amazing things that are happening at the microcellular level and frequential level and time level, and all kinds of things that are incredibly beautiful and amazing that just get glossed over by I hate you.
Mhm.
or I resent that. That just and to me it's extremely hyper focused on the ego, and self preservation within a social context. That's the only time it matters. If you're angry about or resentful about something, it's because of something social in this nature, in this system. So you have to be willing to stand on your own, be an individual, recognize your own sovereignty, and say, from that sovereign place, you know what? I'm done with that. I'm done with that anger. I'm done with that resentment. And I don't need that anymore to drive me, to define me, to help me understand my own identity. Yeah, I am a person whose mother was murdered, and people may be able to label me the son of a murderer, but that doesn't define me. Those are attributes and traits now, not parts of my identity. They're labels. And I think that when you get to that place, you can forgive more easily because you've grown beyond it.
Okay, so we have not that long before
Yeah.
the end of the show, and there's still a lot of questions I have. Um, I don't know which one to give because they're all kind of important. What can your friends and family do, and what has been your experience with your marriage, like in relating to women? Like, how did that dynamic develop?
Yeah. So I first kind of told this story very openly at a poker group, and it just kind of came up. We were drinking, we were talking poker, and interestingly, this was a poker group with a group of psychologists, right? And I'd been playing with them for 6 years at the time, and they were all psychologists, and and I told them this story, and they're like, "Wow, is that really true?" I was like, "Yeah." And one of them asked me, "Well, have you forgiven him, or how do you feel about it now?" And I'm like, I've forgiven him." And one of them asked me a very poignant question: "How do you know that you've forgiven them? That you've forgiven him?" And I was like, "Well," it was the first time I'd have asked that question. I was, "Well, I don't carry the anger and resentment anymore." And that's exactly what I said. And again, I think it's because I looked up that definition. I knew that I wasn't carrying the anger and resentment anymore like I had been before. So the answer to what can my friends and family do, like, it's first off, it's just listen. If they're willing to talk, listen. And the
How do you
willing,
know that you're not being invasive, right? Because I want to call my friend and be like, "Hey, buddy, you want to talk about anything?" But I mean, what the hell can I do, right? And I feel like maybe I'm upsetting him more by asking him. Maybe he wants to compartmentalize it. I don't know.
yeah, and that's where it's important to have a relationship. You really have to understand that person's needs, and I think that for me, this is where it gets kind of different because I had so much time to process this loss from the time that I was 9 to 17 in one version, and then from the time that I was 17 to 23 in another version, and then technically from the time that I was 0 to 9 in a different, completely weird, like, false version.
Yeah, you've been dealing with it your whole entire life in a way.
Yeah, yeah,
Not in
and
a way. You have been dealing with it your whole entire life.
what I would suggest is, like, just getting to, like, doing the normal things, doing the routine things as quickly as possible. Like, just and not to forget, but to integrate, to be present when the emotions come, because they'll either be there or they'll come at certain times, and being present enough and connected enough to know, okay, this is what's coming. It's time for this to come out. That's one thing that I would certainly recommend, just at a friendship level. Just maintaining presence, some kind of normalcy. You know, everybody knows what's going on. You don't have to act weird. It depends on the person, whether or not they're going to take offense, but you can be open about it. With
That's
them.
what I've been trying to do. I'll say, I don't know what to say, but I'm just trying to be genuine in my interaction.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I have another question for you before we finish up. I've some trauma in my past, right? And I've been in therapy and I like cry about it and stuff. But it seems like that pain is just infinite. And yeah, you feel better if you have like a really long cry. but it kind of seems to come back
Mm-hmm.
with something so much more awful. Do you think that that pain is infinite or is it finite? Like, is there a way that you can? It touches a little bit on the forgiveness, but it's still a little bit different because that pain. I think that for somebody who experiences that part of the horror is knowing that, oh my God, I'm going to feel this for the rest of my life. My grandmother died like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I could cry at the mention of her name
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
easily. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm, sensitive, but like, I just don't know how people, what do you think? Is there,
Yeah.
is there an end in sight? Like a light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, where I'm at now is everything is frequency, including emotions. I think emotions are a particular frequential vibration. And I think that things in our lives can resonate with that frequency and cause that frequency to start vibrating again within us because they may be trapped inside of us. And I believe that there are ways and methods and techniques to release them so that the parts of you that are holding on to those emotions are able to let them go. And some of that is conscious, but I think a majority of it is not, is actually subconscious and has to do with habitual mind work and perhaps meditation or framework reconstruction or identity reconstruction or there's all kinds of different things, but to me it boils down to processing these emotions, working them through. And looking at any number of healing modalities that will be compatible with your person to process those through and grow beyond those emotions that may be traumatic.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really something that's very overwhelming. And I don't know. I don't really know how to be helpful, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It's very confusing, and I think just like I say, just presence and social connection, I think is a really big deal, and even just expressing like that desire. I want to help you any way I can. This is what I want. It is my desire to help you. I'm not, and maybe even saying I don't feel sorry for you. I'm not trying to give you my pity. This
well, I
isn't.
do feel sorry for him. How could I not? How could anyone not
Well,
feel sorry?
it's it. People don't want your pity. I think especially if you're a man, they don't want your pity. But if they're, I think, an evolved man, they're willing to ask for help or at least accept it when offered. Pity is
I
something.
think of it as pity. I guess I think of it as like compassion and like,
Yeah,
like sympathy, like
yeah,
not empathy, but sympathy.
yeah.
I think what we should do is we should do another show soon with Melina,
Hmm.
and we could talk about some of these techniques that you guys have been doing, and then maybe some of the listeners can take something away from that and try and incorporate that. Because
Oh
here
yeah,
we are, we're talking about this stuff. And it's kind of like woo woo a little bit, some of those healing things. But maybe if we can delve into that a little bit more, I'd really like that.
yeah, yeah. She could even probably do a session like live.
Oh, really?
Yeah, either on
Okay.
me or you, and
All right. Maybe I'll be the guinea pig. I don't know yet. I'm not sure if I'm ready for all that. But
yep.
okay, cool. So we're going to have to break then. Proof of Love is now. This was an incredible episode. Thank you so much, Chuck, for being so open-minded and letting me ask questions and giving me a space to not offend you. Because I think that, we got to kind of help each other in these kinds of situations because they are going to come up.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
And you bring up a lot of good questions. So thank you. And where can people find you online?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So Twitter, Chuck Williams 37. Definitely check out flote.app, flote.app. And my username there is Chuck_Williams. And if you're a new user, definitely ping me and tell me your pain that you experience on Flote because I'm doing everything I can to make it a better place.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much. We'll see y'all next time on Proof of Love.
Do you like cryptocurrency, politics, economics, activism, or art? Then check out The Tatiana Show, where you can learn all about it in a fun and non-intimidating way, as if you're just hanging with friends. Go to thetatianashow.com and listen now. Proof of Love has been brought to you by CryptoMediaHub.com, a boutique marketing and PR agency for Bitcoin and beyond. Show me your heart. I know that it's beating. Tell me that you love me too. 'Cause I need some proof of love. 'Cause I need some proof of love. 'Cause I need some proof of love. Thank you for listening to Proof of Love. Please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Proof of Lovecast. More episodes can be found at proofoflovecast.com. And make sure you leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends. You are listening to Proof of Love with Tatiana Moroz and Lauren Kasovitz. This show may contain adult content, language, and humor and is intended for mature audiences. If that's not you, please stop listening. Nothing you hear on Proof of Love is intended as financial advice, legal advice, therapy, or really anything other than entertainment. Please take everything that you hear with a grain of salt. Oh, and if you're hearing us on an affiliate network, the ideas and views expressed on this show are not necessarily those of the network that you're listening on, or of any of the sponsors or affiliate products that you may hear about on the show.